with this dude, Shifter Xerus. Okay. So Shifter Xerus is. Oh, I guess we should zoom out a little bit. This card feels really unreliable. The reason why, also the wording's a little bit ambiguous. We're not sure if it means at the beginning of each turn or at the end of each turn. I'm just gonna interpret this as the beginning of each turn, transform to random minion, and it's just extremely unreliable. Because it can be unplayable every turn, hypothetically, until you get, like, until turn 10, there is a scenario where you have this and you can just never play it. And you don't want that kind of unreliability in your hand and in your deck. What I do like about it is that it creates this, it like completely satisfies people who just want to completely change the dynamic, and also some decks can afford to just not do stuff. You know, Warrior for a while can just keep hero powering, at least a control warrior on paper. So this card seems to be made more for like the streaming and the more of the entertainment YouTube stuff. I did hear from the Blizzard devs when I talked to them today that this card was originally designed to be playable every turn. It was going to be at maximum at least as much mana as you can spend or less. So it would say it was on turn 5 and you drew this card. It would be a 5 mana minion at random or less. It can summon you Druid of the Claw, or it can summon you all the way down to friggin' Goldshard Footman down to 1 mana, or I guess it's Wisp at 0 mana. And originally they felt like that was it was like too. It was like too good, I think, if that was the case. It would always be like, it didn't really accomplish what they wanted to do. Instead, this is what they chose. And as a result, it's a fun card. I don't think it's very strong. Yeah. Technical in the Zoth. Death Rattle, deal 1 damage to all minions. It doesn't feel very impressive. It's supposed to be like a replacement to Explosive Sheet, but Explosive Sheep doing 2 damage to all minions is very, very important because 2 damage to each minions is enough AoE to usually set up for a lot of strong clears. You don't really see many minions have 1 health stat lines, and the 2 damage AoE kills a lot of 2 drops. It also conveniently sets up for like a lot of AoE that's gonna be able to happen too. So you see Explosive Sheep, and even then Explosive Sheep is very like fringe. You only see it in like Echo Mage and stuff. So I'm not terribly impressed by this card. What I do think it does have a place in is some of those enraged decks and Warrior. But even then, there's better cards than this. The biggest downside of this card is that it takes a spot in your deck. And in the end, you guys ever been in this position where you're like Patron Warrior and you draw like Inner Rages, Whirlwinds? This might be another case for you to have synergy, but that also means that there's going to be scenarios where you draw this in your hand and you don't actually do anything. You just like pass. You just like, maybe you play this, and then you hero power, and then you have like 5 more floating mana. I think that other warrior card that deals 1 damage to all your minions is much more reliable. So, I'm not that big of a fan. Not that big of a fan. All right, Zealous Initiate. I already kind of gave you my initial thoughts. I feel like I don't have to, talk about it too much more. So, let's go. Twilight Geomancer, 2 mana taunt. Battlecry, give your Cthulhu taunt. It's pretty unimpressive. The stat line is actually very poor. 1/4. 1/4 doesn't really trade into 3/2s, which is the golden standard of a lot of 2-drops. Even 2/3s trade even more favorably because at least it trades into a 3/2. Like assuming they attack twice into each other. So I'm not very impressed by it. I think this card is. Like, there is redemption, like, redeeming value in giving Cthulhu Taunt. And the thing is, like, it's just, like, a slightly below average card. So I would give this, like a 2 or 3 out of 5. I like scaling out of 5, because I think 10's a little bit too relative. It's like, but, like, 3 is, like, average, 5 is, like, staple, 1 is, like, unplayable. So this is, like, a 2/3. The reason why is because I think it'll be reasonably competitive for the 2 mana slots because you have the Beckoner of Evil. Twisted Worgen actually might fit in some aggro decks. Aggro is losing a lot of tools, and stealth minions with 3 attack guaranteed to hit might actually be really useful. If Knife Juggler, for example, doesn't make the cut in Face Hunter or other aggressive decks, Twisted Worgen might legitimately make the cut. So I think it's a pretty average card, and I like that. I like the flavor of it too. I like that. You know, this Twisted Worgen. He doesn't look very stealthy at all, which is like kind of the irony of it all. Like he's been corrupted and he's like shouting and stuff, but he's not very stealth. So I think it's a very funny card. Beckoning of Evil is kind of like the standard of what Cthulhu decks will need to play. Every Cthulhu deck needs to survive to the late game, and as a result, you need to be able to play on curve. So this is very solid. 2 mana, 2/3. You're not gonna really complain about it. It's not gonna overwhelm you either, because even though it's played against you, you're gonna see what the Cthulhu's stats are. And in the late game, even drawing this and playing it is not very strong. So it feels a very balanced, reasonable 2-drop. A lot of Cthulhu cards are going to actually kind of echo this sentiment. Their stats are just very reasonable. They're not overpowering. And just playing them alone on curve and never drawing Cthulhu means that you probably will be slightly behind. Because you just keep playing a 2/3 that does nothing. You keep playing like a 3/4 that does nothing until you draw Cthulhu and all of a sudden it does everything. Biofin Tide Hunter. Battlecry summon a 1/1 ooze with taunt. Someone made this observation that this card might actually be very good in aggro, because like an aggro Murloc, or even not even maybe aggro Murlocs, but in general, like, it actually can be very useful. The fact that it has a 1/1 with taunt is so annoying, because almost everything will not want to trade with it very early on. You know, say for example you play a 1-drop and then they develop Armor Smith or something, and then all of a sudden now you get to play this. Armor Smith has to attack into this and not remove the 2/1, and you get more damage and better trades. Maybe you coin a weapon out, maybe you start pushing a little bit more. So don't underestimate this fact that the ooze has a taunt. That might be the most redeeming value of it. This card overall is pretty good. And it also passes the vanilla test, which is very good. Also, it's a Murloc. It's got a lot of good things going for it. Also, it's got purple hair like me, so you know what? I like that card a lot. Duskboar is more like a troll card. I think if anything, it's just more of like a funny card that could happen off of. It's like another 4/1, and that's like something in Shredders that is just gonna screw people over in Wild. It's another card that you have to be wary of. It's like this, the One-Eyed Cheat, freaking Millhouse Manastorm, and now and Succubus. Duskboar joins that list. I think that's the most useful you ever see Duskboar. I mean, you might see an Unstable Portal, like stuff like that. It's just pretty unimpressive otherwise. It just dies as hero power, and it's not very valuable, at least in a constructed format. Maybe in an arena if like you face like priests and paladins who conveniently can't kill it. Maybe, but I doubt it. Oh god, Nat the Dark Fisher. I'm not too hyped on Nat, man. I think I think the only redeeming thing that you can argue for Nat the Dark Fisher is that if you want them to draw into fatigue in a Control Warrior versus Control Warrior matchup, say you guys both played Elise Starseeker and you draw and you have Nat the Dark Fisher, that actually might be legitimate to get them deeper into their deck and fatigue. But that's a very obscure corner case. I think that this legendary was made for just a lot of like flavor. You can see that Nat Pago gets corrupted. He's a Dark Fisher. He's like getting consumed by all the eyeballs, but he's still like in the end he's like corrupted by evil, but he's still a guy that just likes to go fishing, which is just kind of funny. It's, in essence, like I really love a lot of the artistic, creative sides of what Blizzard chose to do. A lot of people might feel like Blizzard got like lazy by repurposing existing cards and just like retooling them, like Polluted Loot Hoarder, for example. But you can, if you just like understand what the world they're trying to build, in that tavern all of a sudden just has these old gods corrupting them. This feels really fun, and in the end, every set you don't want to have like legendaries which are just overpoweringly good. Not every legendary should be Dr. Boom status. It's good to have like a mixture of some cards which people can evaluate and see if it's good or not. You just can't have every legendary that's like at the same power level, so it's okay. Okay, this card is just stupid. It's just stupid. Hobgoblin hype. Disciple of Cthulhu. When I say it's stupid, it's more like silly. It's like I'm not hating on it. It's just I think it's definitely funny. I laughed at it at first, but it's just Jesus, Blizzard, come on. What a meme. This is proof that Blizzard like reads all the dank memes, okay? It's just such a meme. Disciple of Cthulhu. This card's actually pretty nutty. I think this is actually one of Cthulhu deck's best cards for sure. The fact that it can win you tempo on the board when most of the Cthulhu cards are vanilla stats that just play for stuff is actually really strong. I personally think that Disciple of Cthulhu will almost be a staple as the Beckoner of Evil and a few other things, because the most important thing is that not only does it deal 2 damage guaranteed, but it's also like a way to curve out. Because 3-drops, if you guys remember, 3-drops were like, for a long time, one of the worst slots in Hearthstone, along with 5 mana. It seemed like even slots were good because you could always play like a 2-drop, a 4-drop, or hero power to squeeze and everything. But 3-drops were always really awkward. So I feel like if you're, this is pretty reasonable. It's not bad. It's not bad. Squirming Tentacle, 2/4 taunt for 3 mana. This is, people kind of point at this and say it's like blatant power creep of Silverback Patriarch, which is a 3 mana 1/4 taunt. Silverback Patriarch gets this caveat that it's a beast, so it might actually it might actually like get like beast synergy, like activate kill command, or you get it off web spinner, etc. Which sometimes you do want taunts, but this is just like relatively unimpressive. 2/4 is just like not good enough to contest anything that has 5 health, 4 health or more, because it will just trade very poorly. It doesn't really feel like it stops enough, but what it does do, see, the reason why I don't like this is because it doesn't trade in 2/3s, which might be more popular with Cthulhu. But what it does do is it introduces like the fact that you have more vanilla taunts, and if you want to play like taunt decks, like don't forget that there's also existing cards like Bolster and stuff, and the more that like taunt minions come out, the more like aggro kind of suffers if they end up becoming a good thing. Like you don't know if this ends up replacing something in Priest, for example, because Priest just wants to keep taunting stuff. They lose Death Lord, they lose Dark Cultist, they don't really have like nearly as many 3s. Maybe Priest plays this or something, I don't know. It's hard to say. Speaking of things that go in Priest, or in this case, don't go in Priest, Silithid Swarmer is an extremely conditional card. I'm not a big fan of it because it commits you to attacking every turn. And even if you're a rogue, you have to commit to hero powering on 2. But that means on turn 5 onwards, assuming you're attacking both those turns on 3 and 4, you need to hero power again when you want to develop something else. This feels more like a way to kind of gimp Faceless Summoner from Mage. Like if Faceless Summoner, which is a 6 mana 5/5 that summons a random 3-drop, if this ends up coming from that Faceless Summoner, the Mage is pissed because this will never attack. It's the same as an Eerie statue. Interesting design though, because you know obviously these kinds of conditional setups, you never know if they end up becoming the case, and it's just kind of funny. Funny if it actually works, but overall really unimpressive. I would rate this as one of the worst cards in the set. Spawn of N'Zoth, Death Rattle, give your minions +1/+1. This is pretty decent in some like Swarm decks. I think Swarm decks need to exist, and they will exist. Like you look at that Forbidden Tentacle cards. If you like Forbidden Tentacle cards, summons a bunch of tokens, so you can play this preemptively, and this is giving all your minions +1/+1, which is like a really powerful effect, but it requires a lot of conditional setup. So I would say that this card is just like below average. So there's, you know, just to get, again, the scale, the spectrum that we're talking about is like weak, or like weak / horrible, below average, average, above average, and then like really good / stable. That's kind of the spectrum. I think this is like below average. It might fit. It might be like a 1 or 2 of in like a zoo deck, but that's about it. It doesn't really fit many other decks. It's a very specific, very specific deck choice. The art though, look at this art. Is that like an elephant or something? Like a miniature elephant octopus thing? They have a lot of like chibi art in this set. Like this dude. This dude's like, again, the same thing as the Beckoner of Evil. I think the biggest thing though is that, again, 3-mana minions were like really awkward for a while. And if you're gonna be playing Cthulhu deck, this actually is like very reasonable stats. The 3/4 can trade with almost anything that's played on turn 2 or 3. It's very rare that a 3-drop can trade into this effectively. I guess it's like the new Arcane Golem. So in standard, at least, I feel like Twilight Elder might actually be one of those heavy lifted cards. If you have 2 Twilight Elders and 2 Disciples of Cthulhu, very reasonable way to make sure that your early game curve is reliable. And of course, you mix in a couple spells. This is a very solid card. This actually, I think, might be even more important. No, the turn 2 play is really important. But like Beckoner of Evil, Twilight Elder, Disciple of Cthulhu, those are like the core cards for each Cthulhu deck. Aberrant Berserker. I don't know. It's people want to compare this to Evil Heckler because if you do like 1 damage to it, I guess it becomes a 5/4 without taunt. I feel like that's a really unfair comparison. I think what you want to, because you wouldn't put this deck card in the same deck as Evil Heckler, so it's not a 1/1 comparison. In a deck like this, a deck that would use something like this would be one that really doesn't mind damaging their own minions. So the first one that comes to mind is Warrior, because you have so many of those whirlwind effect type stuff with that Ravage Ghoul thing. But even then, it doesn't feel like it fits the game plan. Like, this doesn't necessarily control the board. It doesn't necessarily, like, tempo anything because you're not, like, dealing damage to stuff. You're just setting up a 5/4 for 4. What it does do is that, because it allows you to enrage and +2 attack, it allows you to get some early trades, which becomes more threatening as time goes on. But again, I feel like since it doesn't have taunt, doesn't have any death rattle, doesn't have like a true battle cry, it feels like you can use your mana slot a little bit more effectively. In Arena, I feel like this is actually not too bad because in Arena you're often trading. So I would say this is actually one of the slightly above average cards in Arena if you can use it correctly. I actually haven't been evaluating a lot of Arena stuff. This is a terrible Arena card. There you go. More Arena analysis. Blackwater Pirate. Really funny art. I like it. I just like pirate cards in general. Pirates just needed more stuff. One of the things holding back pirate decks in general is just lack of cards. You just didn't see them. You just didn't really see them like have many things to do. They just had like Captain Greenskin and then maybe like the Bloodsail Raider and then that's it. You know, like you don't really play South Sea Captain because it's just like pretty bad stats and you always need a conditional card. Maybe you play the South Sea deckhand. But I don't really like that this plays on turn 4. Weapons costing 2 less is a really powerful effect. Because weapons are amazing value, and they can grab you incredible tempo if used correctly. However, this is like so awkward right now. You're dedicating your entire turn to playing a suboptimal card, and the only way you can benefit off of it is if you immediately play Fiery War Axe, which feels like, according to a Warrior's condition of how they establish tempo, they'd rather just play another 2-mana card like Bloodsail Raider or, you know, the other pirate thing that buffs it. So it doesn't feel very reliable. I would rate that as like just a bad card. I don't know. Cthulhu's Chosen. This card was directly compared to Pilot Shredder because it's a 4-mana 4/3. Like Divine Shield kind of gives you this implied fact that it can take damage, but it's significantly weaker because Divine Shield is just slightly inferior to Death Rattle in terms of how trades go. Divine Shield can get hit off with hero powers of Mage and Druid, Rogue, etc. But I do think that people are forgetting the relative power level of how Hearthstone has dropped because Shredder's rotated out in Standard. Cthulhu's Chosen will, as a result, have much higher impact. There's a lot of 4-drops that won't see play. One of the cards that you might see very often is Tomb Pillager and stuff like that. Savage Combatant, Tomb Pillager. You might even see Evil Heckler, who knows. There's not many like 4/5s that are out there anymore. there's only pretty much the Yeti and then the Yeti equivalents of it, like Master Revolution or whatever it is. So the 4/2 Divine Shield is actually pretty annoying. Pretty good. Pretty good. I mean, I would definitely rate like a 3 or 4 out of 5. Cyclopean Horror feels a little bit too conditional. This is like specifically tech against like swarm decks. Even then, you need 2 minions for it to break even with Ascension Shield Master. And sometimes you just want to play Ascension as a 3/5. The upside, of course, is that it can be a little bit higher health. But if you're gonna be playing this card, it's most likely against a swarm deck that won't have like it basically needs to have 3 or more minions on turn 4. Which if they do, they'll probably trade into it efficiently anyways, unless it's a bunch of 1/1s. So. Not a big fan. I think it's like, yeah, it's like below. It's like average, slash like slightly below average. 2.5 out of 5. Eat of Secrets is not very good because the stats are too bad. But everyone has said that its importance of existing, it's just really good that it is impossible to play in Standard. In Wild, I think you'd rather just play Kazan Mystic. Also, in Arena, it's not very reliable because people probably usually play 1 or 2 Secret at a time. But what it does do is say, like, hey, look, Secret Paladin, you probably have to be really careful because this can just eat it all. I feel like this was just made to appease the people. That's pretty much it. Yeah. Sorry, Cyclopean Harbor is pretty okay in Arena, I think. Because most of the time people play, like, 1 or 2 minions, and you can just play that if you're behind. Because in an Arena, not many stuff helps you the more you're behind, so I think it's okay. Evolved Kobold is not good. This is, like, directly impacting anything that says 4 mana minions as well, like Pilot Sky Golem. The spell damage is nice. Like, if anyone has saw the Jungle Moonkin games, like, having having +2 spell damage is really cool, but this takes up your entire turn 4. If you want to play a really late game oriented stuff, you can always just play like Azure Drake and still have more reliable deck. So it just feels like another option to give spell damage deck some wombo combo potential. But like if you're playing that kind of deck, you're probably just playing Malygos, and it feels more reliable to play other stuff like Azure Drake, Blood Mage Thanos. So I give this like a 1 out of 5 in every single format, in Wild, in Standard and Arena. Faceless Shambler, 4 mana, 1/1 taunt. Copy a friendly minion's attack and health. I remember reading this card and I was like really confused on how to evaluate it because I don't particularly think like it's very good. Because at best, assuming you're trying to play this on curve, it only copies the best minion you have. And let's say you don't have a board, then this becomes a 1/1, right? So, yeah, actually I think this is just not a very strong card. It's too conditional. Like, you need 2 conditions. First, you need to have a minion on board. The second is that you need to have a good minion on board. Because let's say you're playing Shaman or something, you have this. You're just gonna copy a totem like a 0/2. That's even worse than a 1/1. Yeah, it's definitely one of the weakest epics I've seen. You'd rather play like freaking Murloc War Leader in your deck than that one, most of the time. I mean, in the best case scenarios, you can use it to do some really fun stuff, like copy a huge minion like Fel Reaver or something. But it doesn't feel like it would fit in that deck because Fel Reaver decks are usually like super aggressive, and that's like the big push of it. Infested Tauren. This is supposed to be the spiritual successor to Sludge Belcher. It is pretty weak stat distribution wise. Like the 2/3 means it gets eaten up by a 3/3, and the 3/3 is the average stat line for 3 drops. So I think this is like a weak card. I would be willing to say it's below average if someone can enlighten me why the 2/2 slime is worth much. But the thing is, the slime that doesn't have taunt itself. Sludge Buzzer said a slime with taunt, so this indicates that Infestatoran will not drop something with taunt, and that means it's not as good of an anti-aggro tool as we thought. This is a cute card. This is supposed to be an homage to Twilight Drake. Twilight Drake is a very well-rounded card. It's extremely balanced too because it's not a good top deck. You want to play on turn 4, but you have to play very defensive and slow. One of the most interesting cards, I think, like one of the most interesting like cards in the classic set for Hearthstone. I really like Twilight Drake. This card, on the other hand, just feels like you're setting yourself up for failure because of the 4 health. It's not that 4 health trades into everything really badly. Like, in fact, if you know, if everyone starts playing defensive stats like 3/4s and stuff, this might be okay on turn 4 to challenge it. It's just that removal still hasn't changed. Swipe still exists. You still have people that like can use True Silver Champion on this. It doesn't feel very good on curve. Plus, it's encouraging you once again to play very slow. And if you're gonna play something slow on 4, because you need to have more cards in your hand, you definitely need to have more impact. So there is the caveat that it is good with Hobgoblin and Wild, I guess. Feels like I get to say that about every one attack minion, like Faceless Shambler. In Arena, I can't really see this doing anything more. Like, if you can get this to be a 4/4, it's like the 4/4 feels like what you'll be averaging, because if you're going to be playing stuff every turn in Arena. It doesn't feel very impressive. Also, it's a bad top deck, which sometimes you are in Arena. Pluto Load Hoarder is it's like average. Like, it's not. Nah, it's like below average. I think I value the immediate draw on the Gnomish Inventor more than the 4/2 stats. The Death Rattle is pretty nice though. Like, drawing a card can't be understated. Like, this is a pretty powerful thing. But the 4 mana, I want to be doing more than just drawing a card. At 4 mana onwards for most decks, I want to be starting to turn the tides, or like strongly turning the tides of the game. Because of the way Hearthstone works, as you start developing more mana, you can start making really powerful tempo plays, whether it's AoE to control the state of the board, and then develop something like Hellfire into something, or on 4 mana you're developing weapons. If you're Paladin or Warrior, if you're a Druid, you're usually pushing some really powerful stuff. And I know these are existing archetypes, but you can get like a theme here. Everyone by turn 4 is usually trying to do like a dramatic swing in Hearthstone in general. Every deck usually has this philosophy. It's very rare for turn 4 it's like, I can pass. I think Freeze Mage and like Fatigue Warrior are like 2 decks that can usually afford to do nothing on turn 4. Even then, they're usually hoping to get like, back then Freeze Mage get Mad Scientist, and Control Warrior still like plays Death Spite sometimes. So I would definitely say it's a little bit too weak. Twilight Summoner, it's supposed to be another, like, again, it's like a callback to Nerubian Egg. I really don't like using other cards too much as a reference because it definitely functions differently from Nerubian Egg. The first is that this has only 1 health and it can attack, so it's very easy to activate. However, requires a lot of setup. I know a lot of people are looking at this immediately and be like, hoot hoot, silence it. But that's not the important thing. Like, if they're silencing this, there's probably going to be much more important Death Rattles to kill. The really big bummer is that if they do silence it, it's not the fact that it got silenced is what makes you sad. It's the fact that you have a 1/1 for 4 mana, and that is just, like, unbelievably bad. People talk about bad stats. It's just one of those situations where if you're playing against decks that do have a silence, for example, you might lose the game right there, because it's just, you basically did the Paladin hero power for 4 mana, and you lost a card in your hand. So it doesn't feel very reliable, but I'm actually willing to be proven wrong, because maybe there's gonna be a very strong Death Rattle deck. I mean, one thing is that this in a N'Zoth deck can actually be really, really powerful, because when you play N'Zoth, you're gonna want to clear everything, and then when you clear everything, more Death Rattle stuff comes out. So I'm willing to change my opinion, but right now I'm saying it's kind of weak. Corrupted Healbot. I know, like, I talked to Raynat, he actually really doesn't like this card. he'd rather just play Pit Fighter, and I have a hard time arguing against him. The 6 attack is not exactly the most relevant damage at this stage of the game, at least for now. The only cards that come to mind are Druid the Claw, which will still exist. That's pretty much it. 5 attack is usually good enough to get by. So would you rather play Pit Fighter, which has a 5/6 but no drawback, versus a 6/6, which potentially puts you further away from winning the game, which is ultimately what you care about? The only caveat is that there is the Auchenai Soul Priest synergy. There is that. And 6 damage is more than 5. So hypothetically, if people were playing Pit Fighter, maybe Corrupted Healbot credits on that. So I can see it being decent in Control Priest. I wouldn't chalk it up to being like unplayable, but I would definitely say it's like in most decks it doesn't fit. Priest feels like it doesn't care about the 8 health restored to the enemy hero because it just cares about making sure it doesn't die and steals every single one of your cards. So, yeah, I think it can probably fit in Priest. Also, in Arena, this is actually a pretty good card. In Arena, like, you don't actually care too much about the health usually. Like, just the fact that I mean, maybe you do want to start pushing for the win, but 6/6 for 5 in Arena is actually a pretty great stat line if it doesn't have any downsides. Compare it to because the reason why I think you compare a lot in Arena versus Constructed is Constructed, you're actively building synergies and win conditions. In Arena, you're usually evaluating based off raw card power, and like what it does if you just play it on that turn and nothing else happens. And if you compare this to a Venture Co Mercenary, which is a 7/6 for 5 mana, but all your minions cost 3 more. Corrupted Healbot actually is pretty decent. You might see this picked pretty often in Arena. Might, you know, I'm not willing to crown it as the king of 5 drops, but it wins a trade. 8 health's a lot though. It's hard to justify it. Crazed Worshipper, 5 mana, 3/6 taunt whenever this minion takes damage. Okay, I think I saw this today on the stream, and I didn't have time to evaluate it. On the stream, I was bombarded by so much information that it was like a little bit hard to process everything. And you know, the more time I'm spending reading the card, then less I'm talking to Ben or even like playing the game. So it felt really hard. This card feels just like okay. If you want to play a very defensive Cthulhu deck, like say, for example, Priest, this seems reasonable because Priest can heal it. Warrior can enrage it more. I don't think it really fits in Warrior as much, but I think Warrior does benefit from being able to buff their Cthulhu a little bit more. But I actually like this in the Cthulhu Priest because it has Taunt, which is very relevant. 3/6 for 5 is exactly Fen Creeper, but it gives your Cthulhu extra damage. Not the worst thing in the world. 6 health is pretty powerful to stop aggro, and if you play this and then trade with it one time and just heal it or Circle of Healing, like I feel like it's pretty reliable. So pretty decent in Control Priest, I feel like. Or sorry, Cthulhu Priest, maybe. Hard seeing it in other decks unless aggro completely swarms the meta. Because, I mean, Taunt's not bad to have, usually, in a game that's as face-oriented as Hearthstone. Cult Apothecary, 5 mana, 4/4, battle cry for each enemy minion, restore 2 health to your hero. I'm pretty unimpressed. I don't know, man. It's okay. Let's just talk about Reno Jackson for a second. The thing about Reno Jackson is that sometimes you play Reno and you can heal for 1,000 health. I mean, you'll still go to 30, but you'll say you healed to full, and then they still have a board anyways. There's actually so many times where I've played Reno Jackson and my opponent just does 12 damage right back, and I'm at 18, and the game kind of like stalls. It's almost as if Reno just said Frost Nova the board, and then that's it. Which is still like a pretty good effect. And this is like conditional, and it's only 2 health per minion. It's not a good replacement for Healbot, unfortunately. Because a lot of times you're trying to clear the board and then Healbot. Remember the Shadow Flame Healbot plays, or if you like what's another deck that uses Healbot very famously? Freeze Mage. You're clearing the board and then you heal bot. So it's very weird to be playing Cult Apothecary. It's like a weird thing. It's a weird interaction with area of effect cards. You don't want to play area of effect, especially ones that damage every minion. So Hellfire is like much weaker with this card. In Arena, the stats are extremely poor for 5 mana, so I would say it's a 1 out of 5 there. Dark Speaker, Battle Cry, swap stats with a friendly minion. The only problem is that the stats on this 5-drop are wildly unimpressive. Actually, no. The 3/6 means it doesn't die to, like, stuff. You know what? Maybe the tempo is okay. So what it can do is, like, you can play a 4-mana minion, bump it to something, and then you can hypothetically swap it so that way you heal it, or you can preemptively do it in case the 4-mana minion took a bad trade. It just doesn't feel very reliable. In the end, you're swapping stats, and if you're not grabbing the immediate tempo with it, you're like you're switching with, you know, people use this as like totems, for example. If they say you're playing Shaman or Paladin, it's like, oh, I'm just gonna make a 3/6 Silverhand recruit. But what are you gonna be doing on a turn 4 play? Most 4-mana minions don't die to 3 attack, and you're also trading stats even with another card. So another card will, if like say you're trading with like with a 1/1 or a 3/1 or something, then this also becomes vulnerable too. Now, I'm not a fan. And in Arena too, like say you have to drop this just on turn 5, it's a 3/6 for 5. That's too weak. Way too weak. Psychotron, Taunt Divine Shield. I think this card's actually like a sleeper for being very reliable. We don't have many good anti-aggro tools when Sludge Belcher and Healbot disappear, but stuff like this actually does help a lot. The fact there's a 3/4 means that aggro trades into it usually really awkwardly. They probably have to throw in 2.5 cards. It's either or Earthshock it. It's one or the other. Sorry, I'm thinking about Aggro Shaman because that's a deck that I feel like is going to be very powerful in Standard, at least based on paper right now. So I think even though people are like, oh yeah, it's just kind of like slightly worse than Sunwalker, I was like, I don't know if this card is actually that bad. I would say it's like average with the chance of impressing because it's also a mech. Like it has some tribal synergy there, so in Wild it might even be very good in some of these mech decks if you want to be playing some other stuff. Like, don't underestimate Taunt Divine Shield, man. That I've run into a few of those, and like every time I play Sunwalker, I've always been like, it's pretty good. I guess the only thing is that 3 mana, like three mana 3/4s are usually standard, and this is 5 mana. So it gets like, on paper, it trades in 2 mana for Taunt and Divine Shield, which feels a little bit excessive. The proper evaluation of this card is that it's like 4.5 mana. If Yetis become a thing, though, this will be in trouble. It actually doesn't trade very well into it. I would say it's an average card, like 3 out of 5. Validated Doomsayer, I'm not a fan. People kind of immediately think Cabal Shadow Priest because it gets stolen. And it is convenient mana usage, like mana slot, right? So that you play 5 into it. The reason why I don't like it is because your opponent can attack into it and dictate its stats. It can be a 7/1 for 5 mana, which if you're not a big fan of Magma Rager, or if you are a big fan of Magma Rager, and you hate winning a game of Hearthstone, then Validated Doomsayer might be for you. I won't discount the fact that this is on paper really good stats, but say you're a Shaman, why should you play this card over the Faceless card that it got, which is a 4 mana 7/7 mana cheaper? You overload a little bit. It feels like it's a little bit too slow of a startup, but it's funny. I like the fact that it's like a Doomsayer that's been vindicated. It's like, usually the corruption is all this kind of evil stuff, but if anything, the Doomsayer just like, he doesn't change, he just becomes happy. It's kind of funny. Good flavor. Ancient Harbinger. 6 mana at the start of your turn. Put a 10-cost minion from your deck into your hand. This is a very powerful effect. because it guarantees you to do a certain thing. And if you're playing Ancient Harbinger, you're probably doing like a very specific thing. Like say for example, you're playing Cthulhu deck. A lot of times people are like, how am I gonna ever make sure I draw Cthulhu consistently? If you draw Ancient Harbinger, it's kind of like the ability that says like at the start of your turn, draw Cthulhu. The only thing is that it's not Battle Cry. If it said Battle Cry, put a 10 cost minion from your deck into your hand, it'd probably be too strong. I want to say that it actually does synergize with Cthulhu enough, because by turn 6, if you're playing a Cthulhu deck, hopefully you've curved out really well and you have an ability for this to survive. But this has like Super Taunt. When I see this card, I'm going to do everything in my power to kill it, similar to Emperor Thorson, similar to Flame Waker, because I don't want it to activate at all. Like Mana Tide Totem, like all these cards have one thing in common. It's like you kill it immediately. You just kill it, because if it gets the effect off, it's too strong. So that's the only downside of this card, but I mean, the setup of it, if it works, is amazing. Like, if you activate it one time, and say there's a deck that can reliably do it, like a Freeze Mage Cthulhu deck or something that can stall, like you play Frost Nova, Ancient Harbinger, you guarantee draw it. This effect is almost broken, because then you guarantee that you'll always get this this consistent 10 mana Cthulhu in your deck. Or Yaxron, or whatever you're playing. You charge. So below average. For Arena, it's not very impressive. Bold of Fist Ogre eats these for breakfast. Nice cleavage, though. Can't be too mad about that. Corrupted Seer is way too expensive, but we don't actually have good Murloc stuff. Murloc spells to synergize with it. Outside of Anyfin can happen, or Everyfin is awesome. Those are like the spells that interact with it, and one of the most awkward things to do is like play Consecration in like a Murloc Paladin. Assuming you're like playing a really fast, aggressive one, not like the combo Murloc Paladin, because we know that that's all nerfed. This is like attaching Consecration to Murloc itself, which gives you additional forms of AoE. It doesn't exactly stick out to me in a current deck. Maybe we're just like not anticipating Murloc Druid actually becoming a thing. I mean, people always joke about Murloc Druid. Whenever there's like this popular meme for a long time that as soon as a new person posts on like subreddit and they're like, hey, what's like a good deck? Or like, what's like a good like budget deck that I can start playing Hearthstone? I'm really new to the game. The first thing people always say were like Murloc Druid. And I'm not saying this would fit in it. I'm just saying this enables decks like that to finally have relevance to play it. It's just interesting. I think a lot of decks can probably afford not to play this card because they have so much access to other AoE. But if you're playing like a new version of Murloc stuff and you need some removal and some other ways to tempo, like this might actually be okay. But it just feels like too much. If it was 5 mana, I'd be like, okay, it's pretty decent. 6 is very expensive. Very, very, very expensive. So I would say it's like, eh. I love the art, though. This is actually amazing art in a lot of ways. You just see, like, it's just so well done with the way it feels like a classy Murloc, like that's like very educated in the ways of ancient magic, but it's also corrupted and stuff. And you get like a sense that you want to love it, but it's also kind of scary. Mukla, Tyrant of the Veil, add 2 bananas to your hand. Bananas are really powerful. I mean, just play the Banana Tavern Brawl and just get a quick reminder on why bananas can be really strong. Not really a big fan of that card though. Like, I think it doesn't accomplish enough of what you want on turn 6. The bananas are great with like Antonidas, good with like Flame Waker, so it might fit in like that mage deck, but it feels very niche. Not very impressed. But I mean, in the end, it's like The reason why is because you normally evaluate like, well, 2 bananas are like like +1/+1, so it's like a 7/7. But you have to spend 2 more mana to do that, so it's. Hey, I guess they are spells. I mean, it might fit. You know what it might fit? It might fit a Yogg-Saron deck if you're gonna be playing minions and stuff because you're playing a lot of spells. I don't really like it though for that kind of stuff. It's just trying to find some positives. It's overall kind of weak. Nerubian Prophet at the start of your turn reduces cards cost by 1. So on paper, this actually makes decks a little bit more consistent, which is very good. Consistency and versatility is very important. If you mulligan and you get this into your hand on accident, it's actually okay because by turn 3 you can play it. Turn 3 for 4/4 is great, but if you draw it 1 turn later, turn 4 for 4/4 on turn 4 is not that great. But the nice things only cost, it'll cost cheaper the longer you hold it. These kinds of effects are really, really, really powerful for control decks because normally one of the biggest problems for classes like Druid, for classes similar to that is like even Priest, for example, is that you spend all of your turn using these AoE stuff and you can't develop onto the board. But if you're playing a slow defensive Druid, now all of a sudden you can swipe or you can even Starfall and then maybe play this for 1 or 2 mana in the later stages of the game. Which means all of a sudden tempo gets to be dictated based off of how you're distributing your hand's resources and like how you're budgeting stuff. This is a very good example of like a card that a good player will be able to navigate through. And yeah, maybe like on paper it's really easy for any player to use, but it's just one of those things where like a noob would probably misuse this a lot in a constructed deck. They can't just pick it up and be like, well, I'm just going to play this immediately. Some people realize they can hold on to it and get better opportunities. I like the card a lot. It's good. Scaled Nightmare. At the start of your turn, doubles minions attack. It's noob bait, I think. It's like one of those things where like it's one of those things where it's like because it's a 2/8, you think it can't ever die. Well, you know what? Blackwing Corruptor still exists. So if you play Blackwing Corruptor and then this on turn 6, that's actually like a decent amount of stats for them to deal with. And not to mention that you're curving out with Blackwing Technician and Twilight Guardian. This card's actually like I said it was noob bait. It's because like Raynad really hated on this card for a while, and to be honest, like Raynad does help like bias my opinions to some of these cards. We didn't talk about many cards. We only talked about a few, but he always said like these are one of the like we were playing. Me and Raynad were playing a bunch of draft for Magic. I brought home some cards. He taught me how to draft, and he said like cards like Scaled Nightmare are like really tempting cards to like immediately be super excited about because like it keeps doubling, but it's in like 3 turns it finally starts becoming a real threat. Even if it lives to a second turn, it's a 4/8 for 6. It's not that reliable, but there are ways that you can make this amazing. Like if you play Dragon Rogue and you conceal it, yeah, I know that's like a really unlikely scenario. But let's just say hypothetically you play a very high tempo deck. Dragon Warrior is like great at plating weapons, securing the board. You play a weapon, you play Blackwing Corruptor. They really can't deal with Scaled Nightmare efficiently. It's 8 health. Maybe there's a chance for this to be like one of those cards similar to Cavaldi Raider or like Floating Watcher. It's just like people don't really think it's that big of a threat, but the 1 or 2 times it's played against you, you're like, holy crap, this card's out of hand. And you can't really kill it. 8 health is a ton. So I would say that this card's not amazing, but don't sleep on it. I would say it's about a 3 out of 5. Scarum Cultist. It's a 6 mana 7/6 Battlecry. Give your Cthulhu +2/+2. Very good stats. Bold Fist Ogre. Does stuff with their Cthulhu. People were really afraid of big game hunter nerfs, whether or not this would ends up being like a card that gets completely out-tempoed. I think it's like okay to play in Cthulhu decks, but I think you could be doing more. Again, you want to be starting to swing the board with more stuff, like the heal cards or like deal damage cards. That's what you want to be doing on turn 6. So I wouldn't really consider putting it in many Cthulhu decks. Bog Creeper, 6/8 taunt, not bad. Ramp Druid stuff, like it's It's okay. I think you just gotta play Ancient of War though. But this is like the kind of card that be pretty decent in Arena. Like Arena 7/6 for 6 and 6/8 for 7 is like very reasonable stats. So expect to see these cards picked, especially because this one's a common. So I think that would be more of a big shine in Arena. Not a big fan of this card. I think it's just like a little bit worse than Harpy Wind Fury or Wind Fury Harpy or whatever it's called. Because it's a little bit slower for 1 extra damage. I guess you get the Beast synergy, so hypothetically we'll see this off Web Spinner play in Wild. Or you might see Ram Wrangler summon this. It is a buff to Ram Wrangler, I guess. But there's a lot of nerfs to Ram Wrangler as well. Not that impressed. Hogger Doom of Elwyn, I think, is a underrated card. I think some people are going to look at this Hogger card and just be like, it sucks. But if Dr. Boom goes out of Patron, it needs other ways to take advantage of the board. And if you're able to, like one of the things with Patron Warrior, sometimes you just, like, run out of actual uses for Inner Rage and Whirlwind. Like sometimes you just have these situations where you're just like, I want to draw a minion, and then I want to be able to climb back onto the board. They cleared your patrons. You need another threat. Hogger could be that 7-mana direct replacement for Dr. Boom in patron decks. It's like, well, I don't have Deathbite, but maybe I have like a Whirlwind and an Inner Rage, and all of a sudden Hogger's like it's like an 8/4 or something, and it's summoned a 2/2 and a 2/1, and it's like, this is actually like a lot of stuff on board. I don't think this card's actually like as bad as people think it is. I don't think it's like overpowering because 7 mana is really expensive, and I'm looking at some of those other cards like Emperor. The Twin Emperor is being one of the strongest cards in the set. But don't sleep on Hogger, man. He's out for revenge. You guys made fun of him for too many years in Twitch chat. And again, the reason why is because you can do something immediately this turn with Hogger. You can set it up so it's like, well, I just play Hogger and then I immediately summon the Gnolls. Not to mention, with his Dying Wish, he's gonna train to something and summon another Noble Taunt. Like this card's good. I like it. This card, in my opinion, is probably one of the top 3 cards in the set. Twin Emperor Velklor is just kind of bananas. Oh, it doesn't show the token. So it's just a 20/20 in stats if you have Cthulhu. Oh, sorry, yeah, 20 stats total, not 20/20 in stats. It's a 4/6 and a 4/6, so it's 20 stats for 7 mana, which on paper is ridiculous. That's even more than Dr. Boom. Dr. Boom is a 9/9 in stats. And the only thing is that your condition has to be your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack, which if you are playing a Cthulhu deck is very likely to happen based off the way you built your deck, if you built it competently at all. Beckoner of Evil, Twilight Elder, Disciple of Cthulhu. That alone buffs it to, I think, 11/11. So if you just played any reasonable amount of cards, like, assuming you've outfaded your deck correctly with Cthulhu cards, you'll almost land this every single time. And this card can just be ridiculous because it also has Taunt, and it summons another one with Taunt. I think this is like either the strongest or like the second strongest. I would say top 3 for sure. At least just like, it's just too much stats. At least it has Taunt, and the attack's not overpowering like on its own, so maybe you can kill one of them, but then you just have a 4/6 hitting on board. But cards like Cairn is just in the corner crying because Cairn wishes he had this kind of value. And Cairn's usually seen as one of the kings of value for stats per mana cost. Doomcaller, Battle Cry, give your Cthulhu +2/+2 wherever it is. If it's dead, shuffle into your deck. This card is more often than not just gonna be an 8 mana 7/9 minion that gives Cthulhu +2/+2. It's very rare that you're gonna be. It's gonna be very rare that 1, you've played Cthulhu and your opponent survived. 2, that you've drawn this card, and then 3, that you'll even be able to play Cthulhu again. So most likely this Doomcaller is, like, again, you guys, I don't want to be too mean, but it's like, it's gonna be one of the things that like inexperienced players are like, wow, this is awesome, I get to play like 500 Cthulhu's if I like Shadow Step this, or if I like use Echo of Medivh and I just keep reviving Cthulhu. But the truth is, most likely the game will end by the time this ends up being relevant. So it's just like playing a big dude in your deck, which isn't bad. I mean, on paper in arena, the stats are okay. 7-9, 8 mana. It's reasonable. Trades well with like Boulder Fist Ogre, for example. So I don't mean to harp on like, you know, people who don't really understand. But in my opinion, I don't think the card is very impressive. Cool. How we doing? I haven't checked in with the chat for a while. I've been just going straight card after card. A lot of feels bad, man. Yeah, this card is probably the definition of like slow. People look at slow cards and they're like, I don't know, man. That Validated Doomsayer or Ancient Harbinger card, those are slow cards. But at least you give it one turn, it does something. Doomcaller is like I'm planning to win by turn 30 of this game. So that's usually the case. Dude, Tom Fleur, thanks for subbing, man. And appreciate all the work that you do for the Meta Snapshot, and good luck in tournaments in the future. Tom's one of the best players from the Asia Pacific region in Australia/New Zealand. Eldritch Horror, just like, you know, just arena stats in a nutshell. It's not really constructed material because by turn 8 you want to be winning the game. Like at this point, securing your win in the game. What it does do is it introduces like a bunch of scenarios where maybe you're starting to use Shaman cards like Evolve, and this is one of the biggest threats that can possibly pop out. If you're playing a 7-mana minion, even in Wild, say like you hit something with Boom and you just keep evolving stuff, like you play Evolve or you play Massive Evolution, this could be a game-sealing token that ends up being summoned by it. So even the fact that this card exists means Evolve can get really out of hand. But I don't know how good 7-mana cards are and how you'll be using Evolve. Most likely Evolve will be on Swarm decks that will end the game by like turn 5 with Bloodlust. But you get what I'm saying. Like the fact that that's the only relevance I see this card having. In Arena, it's not even that impressive for 8 mana. Boogie Monster, worst legendary in the set. It's because of this. If it just said, when this minion attacks, gain +2/+2, it's already like, huh, that's pretty interesting. But the fact that it says it has to kill a minion, and it has to attack, means that there's too many conditions. If you play Boogie Monster, and then you like taunted it up, and it kills a minion, gain +2/+2, it might even be too strong, because then just like, whenever you trade into stuff, you just won't ever kill it. But it's just like too many situational things, and it's also too expensive. Like it has 3 strikes against it, and 3 strikes, you know, not only in baseball but in Hearthstone. In Hearthstone, if you have 2 strikes against you, you're out. At worst, in Hearthstone, you have to have like 1 strike against the card, and it has to be kind of a weak downside. Blood of the Ancient One. If you control 2 of these at the end of your turn, merge them to the Ancient One. I'm not a fan of this card because I think if you control 2 Blood of the Ancient Ones at the end of your turn, like say you play Blood of the Ancient One number 1 and you play number 2 safely, and like number 1 doesn't get addressed, most likely you're very, very, very far ahead, and it doesn't matter if you summon the Ancient One. The Ancient One's like a 20/20 or something like that. It's like a 20/20 card stat line that's just like insanely powerful. And I get it. The whole point is that this is supposed to satisfy like the Timmies, right? The Timmies want to win gloriously. They don't care if their win rate's bad. You just whack your opponent for 20, and you're like, frick, that was really awesome, man. That's what this card's supposed to satisfy. But most likely, if you're like the first one survives and it's a 9/9 for 9, and you played it completely secure on the board, it's like you're probably gonna win anyways. So I don't think again the card text somewhat doesn't matter, but it does create this cool like tension for streaming or for other stuff. It's like, oh my god, he actually might summon the Ancient One. Very much like Major Domo effect, or you know, playing like a very weird condition. It's like it's gonna be happening very rarely where it's like Voltron. It's like it's almost exactly like Voltron. Sagoth the Slitherer. Oh, Dog Raid, what's up, guys? Coming from Dog's chat. Hope you guys caught me in the middle of the card review. I'm going so slowly though, but I hope you guys like my analysis. I think the chat's been pretty receptive to it so far. What's up? Sagoth the Slitherer. Taunt can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. I'm I think that this card text is very, very, very powerful in Hearthstone. Spells are one of your only ways to directly interact with a board and make an active comeback. There's very few cards that are on a minion that say make a comeback in the game. Mind Control Tech is kind of like that, but it doesn't even really secure it. You have to have like powerful techs like Fire Elemental or like even Deathwing. And so like the fact that this has taunt and can't be targeted by spells and powers or heroes, and it's a 5/9 is actually kind of ridiculous. Think about like what can actually deal with this card. Let's just ignore the mana cost for a second. On paper, this is actually just ridiculous because you can't actually kill it very easily at all. It has to be like Deadly Shot or Sabotage, like some of these weird ass spells that can actually get through it. But now we go back into reality and realize that this is 9 mana. It's too expensive. However, I'm just putting it out there that I feel like this card will be played multiple times in scenarios like Unstable Portal and Wild, or maybe it maybe gets evolved up from something, and people are just going to realize that this card is just crazy, assuming you don't have to take your entire turn to develop it for 9 mana. The text itself and the stats are just sick, but it's just way too expensive. So I definitely say it's below average. It's definitely not a bad card in a vacuum, like, you know, by itself, assuming you have the room to play it, and it has taunt, it's nice. Cthulhu, there's not much that needs to be said about this card, because that hasn't already been said. It's a game finisher. It's an actual win condition that you build your deck around, similar to Reno Jackson, similar to freaking, you know, Elite Star Seeker. It's just like one of these things where the longer the game goes, your time's on your side. This actively encourages control, which is something that people always complain there's not enough of in Hearthstone, which blows my mind because I feel like there's actually a lot of control decks in Hearthstone, but people are like, we don't have enough control decks. So Cthulhu is very good. I don't see it played in every single class, but I see Druid, Priest, Rogue, maybe even Warrior. All those classes can definitely play it. Mage for sure too. They can all play Cthulhu decks. I don't think it fits in like Hunter, for example. I don't think it fits in like Warlock. Because you're going to be playing too much on curve to benefit from those hero powers, which makes them so strong. Deathwing Dragon Lord. This card is bad. This is a card that you actually kind of like don't mind that you're getting BGH'd. It's like a weird card that you build around, but it won't die if you play it. Who in their right mind is ever gonna trade into it? And even if you're attacking with it, you need to kill like 3 minions on their side for this to die, because most things don't have like 6 attacks, so it's like 2 attacks into it. You know what the best card is in this scenario? It's like you hope that your opponent's mounted raptor drops like a pit snake, then you can trade into it, or like an emperor cobra. Like that's actually one of the best
Hearthstone's
cards.
so fucking easy
On the other side of the board that you want. However, that said, this card is sweet. Just look at the art. It's like Deathwing has been going to the gym. You can see that he doesn't skip arms or chest day. They're hiding his legs very mysteriously, but I assume he also does legs day. And he's got some really awesome like scales and texture to this. This art is really good. I like it a lot. Makes a lot of sense that like they gave this Kibler too, because it's such like a Kibler card. Super sweet. I'm not seeing it outside a Kibler stream. I will anticipate a YouTube video with Kibler's eyes popping out of its sockets though in about a month. No, I'll give it like 2 weeks. That'll be the highlight of that Deathwing's career. Clonk, I'm gonna interrupt it real quick to read this this tip. Thank you, Clonk. $3. Dog's cute lips meet mine. I gently brush the hair out of his eyes, staring deep into the soft amber glow they give off. As we dive beneath the covers, our hands frantically grab at each other. I win the brawl and climb on top and hear his sweet whimpers. I hope you're talking about Dog the streamer and not just the breed of canines. If so, I'm not one to judge either way. Okay? If 2016, I feel like we can be very open-minded about this. All right, 10 mana, 10/10. This is just like a big dude. just to kind of satisfy the fact that you might recombobulate or something for 10 mana. You might stable portal it in wild. You might do something, but I don't see it's not particularly very impressive. In arena, it's like, say you're playing like a druid and you have like an innervate and couple ramp. Like you have Mire Keeper, the new druid card. Maybe you need a ramp into something. You need a win condition late game. I mean, it is a win condition. If you don't deal with this, it'll slap you for 10. So and it's not even a slap. It's more of like a backhand. At this point, if you get hit, you get sucker punched really hard. This guy's a big dude. Just not really constructed playable. I can see it being picked in fringe cases of arena though. N'Zoth the Corruptor. This is, in my opinion, one of the weaker gods. Just because I feel like by the time you play N'Zoth, the game is most likely determined, or at this point irrelevant that you played N'Zoth. The only exception is if like Death Rattle taunt minions that I'm ignoring are actually very good. However, what makes it cool is that N'Zoth is not very strong, in my opinion, in Standard, but it might actually be very good in Wild. I think this N'Zoth decks in Wild might actually go crazy. You have Pilot Shredder, you have Haunted Creepers, which most likely will be in staple Wild decks as well. You have like Sludge Belcher, which is still extremely relevant in that format because on 10 mana you get to set up a very resilient board. It's pretty good stuff. In Arena, it doesn't stick out too much just because you don't always get guarantees of Death Rattle stuff and you can't build synergy in your deck. So if you get a chance to pick this Arena, I would suggest something else. The stat line is also wildly unimpressive. But if you have like a decent amount of Death Rattles, like 4 or 5 minions, and you summon even 2 of them, it's actually reasonable stats, assuming it's like a vanilla 2-drop stat worthy, like 2/3 or like a Harvest Golem or something. That actually makes up for it a lot. Yogg-Saron is my favorite card in the set. If you guys don't know why, just look at the stream highlights for today. This card is just wacky. It's just ridiculous. And every time I see Blizzard release a new expansion, I always tell them to their face that I don't think that they can top X card from the previous set. I told them, like, as soon as I saw Elite Star Seeker, I was like, there's no way you can top Elite Star Seeker. Like, that card is just completely out of left field and ridiculous and crazy and wild and wacky. I love it. And then I saw Yogg-Saron. I told him again. I told Ben Brode. I told Mike Donay today. I was like, I don't think you can top Yogg-Saron. This card's crazy. Like, how does it get any crazier and random, like more random than this card? It's going to be one day, one person is going to be in a tournament setting, because I do think this is tournament viable to a degree. I don't think it's going to be overpoweringly strong, but I think someone will bring it to a tournament. And there's going to be a scenario where it's like a long fatigue game, and the only thing left to do is to play Yogg-Saron. And what they do is like this glorious, crazy sequence of spells, and in the end they both die. And we're going to have to replay the entire game again, and then bank on another Yogg-Saron roll. It's going to be really funny, but I'm going to be super tilted that I have to cast it, because it's going to be like another 30-minute game. Mark my words, it'll happen one day. I love this card, though. Sorry, Yogg-Saron, that is. In Arena, it's like, okay. Wild and Constructed, it has a lot of application. Your charge is actually like a very, very powerful effect on paper. The fact that you can put a minion from your deck onto the battlefield that you choose yourself is very good. And it's continual. It's a 10-10, which means it doesn't get removed very easily. And if you're playing your charge, most likely you're playing a deck that has big game hunter targets already available, because you're just playing big dudes or like big minions with taunt. Like this is a deck that you can actually legitimately make a case for of Sagath, because it's like, well, you just don't spend that turn putting it. If it pulls any minion that's like 3 mana or above, it's already way overstated in terms of like what the actual thing is. It's like better than Deathwing for the stats, but it doesn't have that same effect of killing all the minions and stuff. So I think your charge is like really strong. People are saying that I'm not saying that you choose a card. It's just the fact that it pulls a minion that you purposely put into your deck is still a very strong effect. It's like a 10-10. Like, you have to deal with it. Like, don't sleep on this card. I think people are always like, it's like the worst legendary by far, but I think like it's not unreasonable It's like definitely not unplayable at all. Everyone's like, ah, this card sucks. Not gonna even bother. It's a very good effect. It's just hard because I don't think it's as flashy nor as fun to build a deck around compared to some other decks. Nor is good. It's just like it's a little bit weaker than like it's a little bit weaker than like Yogg-Strong, which is like completely random, and then it's much weaker than Cthulhu, which just like ends the game.